What would you do if money kept going missing from your register at the end of every shift and your manager was deducting it from your paycheck? And what if you were constantly blocked when you wanted to see the security camera footage? This is an incredible story of theft and manipulation that happened at one of the largest fuel station chains in the United States. The truth that finally came out was more shocking than anyone could have imagined. If you have had a similar experience, please send your story to the email address in the description.
On my first day working at the speed station branch in Columbus, Ohio, I was drenched in sweat from the scorching August heat. I was 23 years old and had transferred here from my previous branch in Cincinnati because my girlfriend had started university in this city. My name is Sarah Bennett, and I never thought I would fall into such a sinister trap in my life, that I would face such ruthless manipulation. When I entered the store on my first day, I felt the relief of escaping the 35-degree heat outside with the cool air conditioning. The store had a typical speed station appearance. On the right side, 3 speed freeze machines were lined up side by side, and on the left stretched the hot food corner. The machines we called tornisters, those rotating hot dog rollers, had been spinning since morning. In the back, giant refrigerators were filled with energy drinks and snacks. There were security cameras in every corner of the store. I counted at least 12 at first glance. My manager Richard Patterson was a man in his mid-40s, with a belly that spilled over his pants, who always wore a blue shirt with the speed station logo. His face was bright red, he was constantly sweating, with dark brown hair slicked back in the nape area. When I first met him and shook his hand, I noticed that his hands were damp. His eyes were small and brown, and when he spoke, instead of looking people in the eyes, he would constantly look elsewhere. His voice was deep but equally disturbing, as if he was constantly complaining about someone. The first week was quite normal. I had worked at the Cincinnati branch for 3 years, so I knew the speed station system very well. I could use the Gilbarco passport register system with my eyes closed. I knew how to remotely activate the fuel pumps, how to do prepay and postpay transactions, how to calculate daily drops, everything. I could even explain the Speed Rewards loyalty program by heart. On Wednesday of the second week, at the end of my evening shift, Richard came out of his office and approached me. I was about to close the register and was checking the accounts. Richard approached me with a paper in his hand and looked at me with furrowed eyebrows. Richard told me that the register was $23 short. I was shocked because I had worked extremely carefully all day. I had double-checked every transaction, I had given every customer their change by counting it out. But Richard was not open to discussion. He told me that this was my responsibility, that according to speed station policy, register shortages would be deducted from the employee's paycheck. The same thing happened the next day. This time it was $31 short. Friday it was $42. Saturday it was $59. In 1 week, a total of $155 had been deducted from my paycheck. I was in a panic, not knowing what to do. My hourly wage was $12.50. These deductions were almost 2 days' worth of my salary. Monday morning I came to my shift early and found Richard in his office. I told him I wanted to watch the security camera footage. Maybe I had made a mistake, maybe a customer had cheated, maybe there was a system error, I thought. Richard hesitated at first, then blinking his eyes told me that speed station policy stated that security footage could only be viewed by the district manager and upper management. But I did not give up. I told him that at my old branch in Cincinnati we had watched the footage in a similar situation, that this was standard procedure. Richard's face turned even redder and his voice rose. He told me I needed to follow the rules, that if I did not know how to use the register properly, maybe I was not suitable for this job. That day during my lunch break I sat in my car crying. With trembling hands I took out my phone and called my old manager from Cincinnati, Linda. Linda was a wonderful woman in her 50s with gray hair who always valued her employees. When I told her about the situation she was very surprised and told me I should immediately call the speed station employee support line. But first I did something else. That evening during my shift, I started noting every transaction while working at the register. I took out a notebook and noted what each customer bought, how much they paid, which payment method they used, the change. Every half hour I made a subtotal and compared it with the money in the register. During my 6-hour shift, there was not a single cent missing. At the end of the shift Richard came again and started counting the register. I stood next to him and watched every step. When he first counted it, the total was correct, nothing was missing. But then Richard told me that a customer was waiting at the fuel pump, that I needed to go help. I went to pump 5, the customer just wanted $10 worth of gas, we did the prepay transaction. When I returned, Richard had closed the register and told me that $47 were missing. Something broke inside me at that moment. Because everything was correct before I left the register. I had all the records in my notebook, every transaction was noted and the total was completely correct. But when I told Richard this, he told me that my notebook was not valid proof, that speed station register reports were the only official record. That night I sat at home thinking. My friend Emma was sitting next to me, holding my hand, trying to calm me down. Emma was a 22-year-old psychology student with curly blonde hair and blue eyes. She could think more logically than me at times like this. She told me that something was definitely wrong, that this was not a normal situation. The next morning I called the speed station employee support line. They gave me a case number and said they had noted the situation. They stated that an investigator would contact me within 2 days. But during those 2 days Richard's behavior towards me completely changed. Now he was standing next to me at every opportunity. He was watching every customer transaction, as if noting my every move. He was constantly reminding me of speed station procedures. He kept explaining how I should properly scan the speed rewards card, how I should sell lottery tickets, how I should process returns. As if I had not been doing this job for 3 years. On the third day in the afternoon, 2 people in suits came to the store. A woman and a man. The woman was in her mid-30s, dark-haired, serious-looking, wearing a dark blue suit. The man next to her was in his 40s, bald, wearing glasses, dressed in a gray suit. They were investigators from the speed station district office. They called Richard to the office and closed the door. They stayed inside for about 45 minutes. During this time, while I was working at the register, I kept wondering what was being discussed inside. Finally the door opened and the female investigator called me inside. Sitting in the office, the woman introduced herself as Jennifer Martinez, said she was from the Speed Station Human Resources Investigation Department. She asked me to explain the situation and I told her everything from beginning to end. I explained that I had transferred from Cincinnati, that money kept going missing from the registers, that when I wanted to see the security footage Richard refused, that I had recorded all transactions in my notebook but money still came up short. Jennifer asked me a very important question. Did Richard ever ask me to leave while he was counting the register? I said yes, that he had sent me to the pumps to help customers several times. Jennifer nodded and whispered something to the male investigator next to her. Then Jennifer told me this. In the last 6 months, 3 employees from this branch had left with similar complaints. They had all claimed that money was missing from their registers, they had all had deductions made from their paychecks by Richard. But none of them had gone through official complaint channels, they had just resigned and left. I was the first person to file an official complaint. Jennifer told me they had examined the security camera footage. And they discovered this: when employees left the register, Richard would approach the register and take money from it. They could not see this clearly due to the camera angle, but it was clearly visible that Richard reached his hand into the register and then put something in his pocket. Then when the employee returned, he would count the register again and report that it was short. Jennifer told me that they estimated Richard had stolen approximately $5,000 using this method in the last 6 months. By taking small amounts from each employee, he thought no one would notice. But because of my experience in Cincinnati, I knew this was not normal and I had the courage to complain. Richard was immediately suspended from duty that day. The speed station security team came and searched his office. In his personal locker, they found $3,000 in cash stolen from Speed Station. In the search of his home, even more money was found, as well as documents containing personal information of some employees. Richard had not only stolen money, he had also copied some employees' social security numbers, planning to commit identity theft. Speed Station sent me an official letter of apology and refunded all the money deducted from my paycheck. They also gave me $500 in compensation and 1 year of free Speed Rewards Gold membership. But most importantly, they appointed me as the temporary assistant manager of that branch.
Richard was sued by both Speed Station and arrested by the police. He was charged with embezzlement, theft, and attempted identity theft. While the court proceedings were ongoing, Speed Station began implementing new security protocols at all its branches. Now register counts are always done by 2 people and security cameras have been repositioned to directly show the registers.
During the court proceedings I learned many things. Richard's lawyer tried to defend that he was in financial difficulty, that he had credit card debts, that this was why he did such a thing. But the prosecutor proved that this was a planned and systematic crime. Notebooks found in Richard's home showed how much money he had taken from which employees, on which dates and during which shifts he had stolen. Everything was planned, nothing was coincidence. The worst part was learning that Richard specifically targeted newly transferred or young employees. Because he thought these employees did not fully know the system, did not have confidence in themselves, would not have the courage to complain. Of the 3 employees who left before me, 2 were under 20 years old, and 1 had transferred from another state. They had all lasted a few months and resigned. Their families or friends had told them they were not suitable for this job. Jennifer Martinez told me something else after the trial. Speed Station had done background checks when hiring Richard, but it came out that 15 years ago he had been fired from another retail chain for a similar incident. But at that time the company had not filed an official complaint, they had just fired him. If a proper investigation had been done then, Richard might never have been hired at Speed Station and I would not have experienced this nightmare. Now Speed Station's new policy is this: every employee has the right to see security footage immediately in case of a register shortage. If the manager refuses this, the employee can call the district manager directly. Also, register counts are now always done in front of cameras, by 2 people, and the recordings are automatically sent to headquarters. I still work at the same Speed Station branch in Columbus. I am now in the assistant manager position and I train new employees. I always tell them this: if something feels wrong, it probably is wrong. Do not be afraid to speak up, defend your rights, because if you do not defend them, no one will. I've married last year. My old manager Linda was at our wedding, she came from Cincinnati. Jennifer Martinez even attended. Now every morning when I go to work, I remember those terrible days, but I know one thing: if I had not kept that notebook, if I had not recorded the transactions, if I had not had the courage to complain, Richard would still be ruining other people's lives. This taught me that sometimes doing the right thing takes courage, but in the end it is always worth it.
Sarah's courage to file a complaint protected not only herself, but also dozens of people who would work at that branch in the future. Richard Patterson eventually received a 3-year prison sentence in court. Speed Station carried out a major security reform throughout the company. This story shows us that sometimes injustices that seem small are actually part of much larger crimes. And staying silent means allowing these crimes to continue. If you encounter a similar situation at your workplace, do not be afraid and seek your rights.